Well, I'm not quite sure what's happening with the technology. I'm too old for technology. Um, but TikTok's fine, and YouTube should be fine, and Instagram and Facebook I'm not sure about. It doesn't look quite normal, but I don't know what else to do, so we'll just have to carry on. So, my name is Neil Beck. I was a doctor in Perth, Australia, Western Australia, for 53 years. I'm retired now. I only do about 50 hours a week and don't get paid. Um, uh, and I'll explain why afterwards. Um, uh, I did 2 years working in hospitals, and then I went into suburban family practice as a suburban family doctor, general practitioner. And we hadn't had a medical school in Western Australia, so I had to go to the Adelaide Medical School, 1,700 miles away. And back then, going to Adelaide was about like going to London is now. Um, it cost $2,000 to fly to Adelaide. So we went by train, and there was a long waiting list to get on the train. Anyway, uh, I left school at 14 to be a farmer. At 15, I decided I didn't want to be a farmer, I wanted to be a doctor. And at 23, I was a doctor. And at 25, I was out in the suburbs. And when I went to open an account at the local service station to buy petrol, they wouldn't believe me. They thought I didn't look old enough to be a doctor, but anyway, they needed the business, so I got it. And because we hadn't had a medical school, we were very busy. We were very short of doctors. Every doctor either had come from overseas, mostly from the UK, and then later from China, and then eventually from lots of places. And family doctors did things that are only done by specialists now. In the early days, I helped 800 babies into the world, or helped 800 mothers to have their babies. I did lots of appendicectomies and tonsillectomies and vasectomies and broken bones, and treated people in hospital with pneumonia and so on. But eventually it was mainly consultations and home and hospital visits. And I had 500,000 consultations, home and hospital visits. And I was interested in the people who suffered the most and got the worst treatment. And that was clearly people who had a mental illness, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, ADD, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and didn't get proper diagnosis and treatment because of the shortage of psychologists and psychiatrists and the high cost of them, and ended up getting relief from their distress with street drugs. In the early days, it was almost always just, I shouldn't say just, it was almost always tobacco and alcohol. But in the late 1990s, we had a very big epidemic of heroin, terrible epidemic of heroin. Originally, to go to London, you went by boat and it took 6 weeks, but in the 1990s we got aeroplanes and all sorts of things came to Perth, which is a very remote city, which hadn't come before, and sadly it included heroin and cannabis and cocaine and crystal meth and ecstasy and things like that. And in the late 1990s, so many people were dying from heroin young people would tell me that they were the last person in their group of friends standing. All the others had OD'd on heroin, so I thought I'd better find out about heroin. So I started to work 10 hours a week in an addiction clinic, which was 99% heroin. And it was a mess. The treatment people got was very unsuccessful, and the doctors, or the doctor at the clinic that I was working with, was always going to funerals. He used to go to the funerals of all these patients who died, and there was a lot who had died. And why was that? Well, I wanted to know what caused addiction. So they didn't know at that clinic what caused addiction, and they weren't interested. We're just treating them. Why worry about what caused it? Well, I thought causes is always very important. If you know what caused the problem, it's much easier to fix the problem, and if you fix the cause, they're much less likely to relapse. So I wanted to know. So I went to the few addiction clinics there were in Perth, and I went to all the addiction clinics in Sydney, about a dozen, and I couldn't find a single addiction worker who knew or thought that they should know what caused addictions. A few of the workers said, oh, they're just dickheads chasing highs. Well, they weren't very bright, quite a lot of them, but they looked sick to me. And then one day in the clinic where I was working 10 hours a week, I saw 15 heroin addicts, and I realized 5 of them had ADD, ADHD. 5 of them, a third of them. And it was obvious that the ADD has led to the addiction. In those days, they often said, oh yeah, the addiction causes mental ill health. But these people had ADD since early childhood and in their early years at school, and it wasn't until their teens or their 20s or their 30s that they got onto heroin and became addicts. And I looked at it very carefully, and I was quite sure that that the ADD, ADHD had caused the heroin addiction, not the heroin addiction had caused the ADD. Of course, addictions make mental health problems worse, and perhaps cause new ones, because what I found was that almost no one had only one mental health disorder. They nearly all had 2 or 3. And I still remember one sad woman who had five major mental health problems. So I realized that so what was happening was that these people were just being given methadone. Everybody got a prescription for methadone to fix their heroin, but it didn't really fix it. Methadone was discovered by the Nazis in 1938, and this was 60 years later, and they're still using methadone, and it was about 5 times as addictive as heroin. And it just ruined, it stopped people's heroin. No, it didn't stop. Research had showed that 50% of people who were on methadone still took heroin when they could afford it. They didn't take nearly as much because they'd spent all their money and sold everything and had didn't have much money, but they still bought heroin when they could afford it, because methadone doesn't stop you from taking heroin. So realizing that a third of the heroin patients had ADD, I started to look for other mental health disorders, and I found there were about 8 or 9 main ones. The commonest was severe anxiety disorders: general anxiety, social anxiety, separation anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, and various kinds of phobias. So many kinds of anxiety, the commonest problem. Major depression, very common. Then bipolar disorder, which is sometimes being high and fast and sometimes being low and very depressed. And then ADD, ADHD, and then post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there was one that I called anger, irritability anger disorder, IAD, irritability anger disorder. There was a lot of domestic violence. In Australia at present, one woman dies every 4 days, killed by her partner or ex-partner. And for everyone that's killed, there's hundreds who are intimidated or treated violently. So anger was a very common cause, and people who got very angry often drank too much alcohol to try and calm down, and either became alcoholics or then switched to heroin. So that's 6. What else? There's another condition that I called PTEF, post-traumatic evil focus. That was people who had something so terrible in their life that they couldn't face it, and they avoided that by focusing on terrible things far away, like Guantanamo Bay or the CIA, the wicked CIA, or conspiracy theories. Post-traumatic evil focus. Not a very successful strategy, not a very successful strategy, because you end up that all the people you mix with are all PTFers as well. Then there was schizophrenia, not very common, but sadly it's a terrible disease, and some people with schizophrenia became addicts, and then some people with autism. I've probably forgotten 1 or 2 of those, but that's about the main ones, about 8 or 9 main ones. And what I realized was that it was these people just didn't get better, and there was great waiting lists because they kept on coming back to get a repeat prescription for their methadone. Methadone is about 5 times as addictive as heroin, very toxic. You can't take it home. You have to go every day to the pharmacy and have your dose, and they have to be careful so they won't let your family doctor prescribe it. Only special doctors in special clinics in faraway places were permitted to prescribe it. That's not quite true. If a general practitioner wanted to, they could attend a course and become qualified to, and licensed to prescribe methadone. But every case that you wanted to put on methadone, you had to ring up the health department pharmacy and talk to a pharmacist who'd never seen the patient and never saw addicts themselves to get their permission to give methadone. So people would stay addicted to methadone for years and years and years, and they just kept on adding to the waiting list. So what I saw was that there was never going to be enough mental health care workers for all the people who needed mental health care, and especially for the ones who had become addicts, because they had a special problem. The mental health clinics wouldn't see them. In the 1970s, they separated the mental health clinics from addiction. They separated mental health and addiction, and there was mental health clinics and addiction clinics. And if you had a mental health problem, well, you'd get an appointment at one of these clinics, and there's often a 3 or 6 month waiting list. But if while you're waiting to see them, you became an addict, then they wouldn't see you. They wouldn't see anyone who was an addict. And the addiction clinics did nothing about mental health problems. People would come in with a heroin addiction and a very obvious anxiety or depression or bipolar or some other problem, but they would never get any treatment for that mental health condition in the addiction clinics. So that was a disaster. So what these people needed was simultaneous treatment, diagnosis and treatment of the mental health issue, which had caused 95% of cases. About 5% of cases were women just keeping their addicted husband company, and they didn't have anything very wrong with them, and they weren't very hard to get off their drugs, but drugs was part of their family life. But 19 out of 20 had serious mental health disorders, and they needed simultaneous diagnosis and treatment of the mental health disorder and treatment of their addiction. And that's called dual diagnosis. And I couldn't find anyone doing dual diagnosis. I couldn't find anyone in Australia doing dual diagnosis. I'm very happy to say that now if you go online you can find people and clinics all over the world doing dual diagnosis, but sadly there's a lot of clinics that aren't, and they're just treating the addiction without treating the mental health, which is hopeless. So I did dual diagnosis treatment, but I had to start my own clinic. I couldn't do it in the clinic where I've been working 10 hours a week. And I very quickly got very, very busy because lots and lots of people, well, the people just got better. Not all of them, of course, but if you treated their mental health, if I treated their mental health disorder at the same time as treating their addiction, they got better. It was far easier for them to quit, and far less of them relapsed, and far less of them kept on coming back every few months for a repeat prescription. And the word spread and I got swamped. What I worked out was that the reason why, there were two reasons why, well, maybe more than two reasons, but why there was never going to be enough workers to look after all the people who needed mental health and or addiction treatment. And the first reason was that mental health carers only had two tools, and the two tools had great weaknesses. Now, and I've talked about this a lot, so I'll just deal with it quickly. Basically, mental health care is medicines or talk therapy. And medicines had two big problems. One is there are so many of them are addictive and they were too slow. People who needed medicines wanted to take medicine that made them well quickly that they could stop. But the people who make medicines want them to take as much medicine as possible for the rest of their life, or as long as possible. So they made a lot of them addictive. Virtually all the anxiety medicines are addictive. Originally it was barbiturates. There were many barbiturates and they were all addictive. And then it was benzodiazepines in the mid-60s. Oh, here's this wonderful Valium and Seropax and Mogadon and Xanax, all addictive. The three main treatments for ADD, ADHD are all addictive. That's dexamphetamine, Ritalin and Adderall. And the other very common, the commonest prescribed medicine in America for 3 years in a row, when I looked at about 10 or 15 years ago, was Ambien. Ambien, or in Australia called Stilnox, is a sleeping medicine or a calming medicine, and it's very addictive. I saw people taking 17 Stilnox tablets a day. I saw a mother and a grandmother and a teenage son in one family taking about 50 Stilnox tablets a day between them. The grandmother taking about a dozen a day, the mother taking 8 or 9 a day, and the teenage head-injured son who had an alcohol problem taking about 15 a day. I've probably got that wrong, it doesn't add up to 50 a day, but they took a hell of a lot of Stilnox. So, and medicines were too slow. When they nearly all came in tablets and capsules, and when you swallow a tablet or capsule, it takes half an hour to an hour to go right down your gut and start to get absorbed into your bloodstream and flow to where it's needed, usually to your brain. Half an hour to an hour to start, and 1 to 2 hours before it's working strongly, which is just too slow. If you're trying not to smoke, trying not to drink alcohol, trying not to take heroin, or if you've got panic attacks or social phobia, just too slow. And it's hard to get the right amount with tablets and capsules because people vary so much in how much they need. Depends on your weight. Are you 40 kilos or 140 kilos? Or 80 or 90 or 110 kilos? They made the tablets and the capsules in 1 or 2 or 3 different sizes, and you could break the tablet, but it's still hard to get the right amount. And if you got too much, you got side effects, and if you didn't get enough, it didn't work, or didn't work well enough. So medicines, big problems. And talk therapy, that is counseling, psychotherapy, various highfalutin names, but basically talk therapy, and that got 2 problems. One is it's too slow. You see a new patient with serious mental health problems plus an addiction, or even whether they've got an addiction or not, you need an hour with that patient. Too slow. We don't have an hour. That's why there's long waiting lists, and on the waiting list people just get worse, and some of them go to hospital, some of them do crime and go to prison, and some of them go to a cemetery. So waiting lists are a disaster due to the fact that medicines are weak and talk therapy takes too long, and talk therapy is expensive. To be a therapist, you have to be an intelligent person with at least a 4-year university degree. You have to have at least a Bachelor of Psychology, which is 4 years at a university, and a lot of psychologists have got a 6 or 7 year PhD in psychology, and the psychiatrists all had to do a 6-year general medicine degree, and then a couple of years, at least a couple of years of general medicine, and then 3, 4 or 5 years of postgraduate psychiatric training. So those people are all very intelligent and have done long training courses, and they need to be paid well. They deserve to be paid well, and if we don't pay them well, we'll be even shorter of them. So the 2 tools both got 2 great weaknesses. Today, everything we do, nearly everything we do with tools. Tools help us to do things quickly, better, at a much lower cost. If something that needs to be done and there isn't a tool, someone will make a tool to do that. Tools everywhere, but not in mental health or addiction. So over the last 27 years, I developed 8 tools, but I'm not sure if I'll have time to talk about that tonight. The other thing I want to talk about, which I've already talked about, but I think I want to talk again about it because I learned some more, is blind areas. There are so many areas in mental health where the treatment misses the point. The actual problem is not addressed. It's a blind area. What are the blind areas? The last time I talked about it, I said there were 8. Today, I reckon there's 10, because I've read it for the 4th time in 2 months this wonderful book on transgenerational trauma. It didn't start with you. It's the best book on mental health I've ever read. I've read quite a lot, and I bought it on the 8th of January, and I'm on the last chapter now for the 4th time, and I learned something more about blind areas. So the blind areas are: mental health is not taught in school. Mental health is the most important thing in our life. The 2 most important things in our life are good mental health and good relationships. Not taught in school. How dumb is that? The second blind area is not finding causes. People get treated for 20 or 30 or 40 years for depression without ever just more and more antidepressants and medicines, but without actually finding the causes. Now, you can't always be completely sure of the causes, but it's a great help. The more you understand the causes, and the more the person understands their causes, the more likely they are to get better and become normally healthy and not need medicines. If they need medicines, they should be given medicines, but that shouldn't be taken as a shortcut that excuses you from looking for the causes. The third blind area is that we treat people as if they're solo, as if they're solo people, and they're not. Everyone is a part of the family stream. Everyone is the product of thousands of mothers and thousands of fathers, and mental health problems are nearly always family problems, and it's much harder to help someone to get over a mental health problem, anxiety, depression, ADD, whatever, if nothing changes in the family. And there's transgenerational traumas. So many of today's problems are due to a grandfather coming back from the war wounded, becoming an alcoholic and unemployed, and that reverberates through the whole family. It affects her daughter, which affects her daughter's children. It affects his son, which affects his son's children. So transgenerational trauma, never heard it talked about. Well, it's so important. And get that book. It didn't start with you, because that's the best book on mental health I've ever read, and I've read some good ones. I must mention, just to counteract that another wonderful book is When the Body Says No. When the Body Says No. And the doctor who wrote that book wrote 4 brilliant books. His name was Gabor Mate. And I should just mention that the people who write the best books had terrible family problems themselves, so it's not 100% right. They exaggerate a bit, and they've sometimes got a bit of blind spots themselves, but that's the people who wrote the best books did so because their families and they had big problems. And Gabor Mate and Mark Wallen both had big family problems. And habits. 60 to 65% of our life is habits. Our brain has got so much to do that it can't manage, we can't consciously manage everything. A lot of our life has to be automatic, unconscious habits. And sleep is a third of our life, and it's a habit. But there are many other habits, and our brain turns things into habits anything that we do over and over and over again becomes a habit. What happens is that everything that happens and that we do is a result of messages, mostly from the brain, but from one part of the body to another party to do something. And the messages are either electrical messages that pass along nerves, and the nerves run to every part of our body, or the messages are chemical messages, hormones and chemicals in our blood, and our blood flows to every part of our body and carries messages. And when we repeat something over and over again, those messages just get stronger and stronger and stronger, and gradually more and more automatic and more and more unconscious, until they're an unconscious habit, and then they're hard to stop. And a great deal of mental health care should be teaching people how to make new good habits and how to break bad old habits. And I never ever heard anyone working in this field talk about habits. But anyway, that's one of the most important things in mental health, and it seemed to me to be a blind area. And I've got nearly 90 under-a-minute videos, as well as several hundred of these live streaming clips, and quite a few of them deal with making and breaking habits. Another blind area is that, and it's happened to a member of my family recently, that they get given a diagnosis, some very smart name, a very smart name, and of course I think it's often helpful. People are happy if they know, oh yeah, I got this thing, and lots of people have got it, so I'm not the only one, and there's treatment for it. But what people really need to know is what they need and want to get better. It's probably helpful for someone who's got ADD to get that diagnosis. For instance, Gabor Mate, who wrote those wonderful books, including When the Body Says No, he was diagnosed with ADD in his early 50s. And then they found that 2 of his 3 children had ADD as well. And that was helpful for him. But what people with ADD really need to know is that they need to learn to focus and concentrate better, and they need to learn to be less impulsive, because impulsiveness is a major factor in ADD and causes them to jump to things and do things and make snap decisions which turn out to be wrong and cause trouble. And of course a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are hyperactive, and they need to be calmer. So sure, if I was still in practice, I'd still be giving people stimulant medicine for their ADD to wake up the front part of their brain, which is only half awake, to help them focus and concentrate better, and that also helps their brain to manage their brain better, which manages the impulsiveness. And strangely enough, taking a stimulant calms their hyperactivity down. So the medicine's important, but just knowing that these are the problems. If you've got ADD, the problem is you need to learn to focus and concentrate better. And so you focus on learning to concentrate better, and that helps. And you learn to not be so impulsive, to consider decisions, what you're going to buy or what you're going to do or who you're going to marry, to consider these things more carefully and not be impulsive. So diagnosis important, but more important to know what you need to learn to do or stop doing. And people not being taught self-help. If there's never going to be enough mental health workers to help people, they've got to help themselves. We've got to teach them to help themselves. And for many things, that's so much better, helping yourself. And so they have to have tools. And that's why I made tools. And the tools are mostly free. And they're online. And you can learn to manage. And that helps so much with another blind area. Mental health disorders should be treated as emergencies. When a mental health problem starts, you start to diagnose and treat it early, it's much simpler, it's much less complicated, it's easier to treat, it's quicker to treat. But what happens so often is partly because of the stigma of having mental health, but partly because this is a blind area, the need for urgency. A lot of people don't get any treatment for 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years, not until they crash, until it's problems have caused problems that have caused complications, and it's a disaster, and then it's 10 or 20 times harder to help them, and they're probably never going to be fully helped. So, treating early. The 9th blind area is blame. Sadly, so often when someone's got a mental health problem, we look for who to blame. Oh, bad mother. Oh, bad father. Oh, terrible kid in their class at school, or bad teacher, or whatever. Blaming is such a false thing and such a harmful thing. The people who neglect or mistreat their children do so because they were mistreated or neglected, and their parents who mistreated them were mistreated and neglected. Mental health problems are multifactorial, and they come out of our societies and our circumstances, wars, for instance, terrible problems, people whose mother died from tuberculosis when they were 3, and they just went from here to there to everywhere. People, a couple in Australia this week have just been put in prison for 9 years because they got on drugs and their babies starved to death. So if you went into their history, you would find that they both had unsatisfactory childhoods. Sure, it was a great shame that they became addicts, but they became addicts because their mental health wasn't adequately treated. And you couldn't lay the blame for that probably on anyone in particular. It's just the whole system. The whole system not very good. So, yeah, and I want to talk a little about the 10th blind area, which I really just discovered recently, today. The 10th blind area, it's really a part of the family thing. It's that people are affected by their family in counterproductive ways. If you've got a family where the people are troubled, poor and unhappy, you sort of feel guilty if you're happy and you're successful and you've got money. A lot of people are unhappy because that's their way of being loyal to their family. I know a family where a man with an unusual name, Christian name, came back from the First World War very damaged and became an alcoholic, and eventually wandered away into the bush and died and was never found. And he had a nephew who was given the same unusual name, and that nephew came from a religious family where everybody was teetotalers and didn't smoke, and his three siblings lived into their 90s, but this guy died at 68 of lung cancer, having been a very heavy drinker and a very heavy smoker. I was his doctor when he died, probably about 30 years ago now, but of course we thought he got lung cancer from smoking, but now we know that alcohol causes cancer as well, so it was the combination. But nobody else in his family smoked, nobody else in his family drank alcohol. Why was he like that? Well, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but the evidence is that he could have just been doing that as a sort of sympathy for his uncle who went to the war and fought to save Australia and came home and went down the drain. So people who could be very successful will sabotage themselves and not be very successful because their family's not very successful. People whose mother had an unhappy marriage and her mother had an unhappy marriage feel guilty about having a happy marriage. So they pick the wrong person, or they play up and they don't have a happy marriage either. A lot of people don't want to feel bad about doing better than their parents did, whether it's in their work or their money or their marriage. They stay loyal to the family. So now if I was seeing patients, which I can't do because I'm not licensed and I'm well into my 80s, so I couldn't do it anyway, but if I was still seeing people and someone had a problem, a big problem, anxiety problem, major depression problem, bipolar problem, ADD, ADHD, and we couldn't find a reason for it in his life, I would then ask about his mother and his father and his two grandmothers and his two grandfathers and his four great-grandmothers and his four great-grandfathers. Of course, we don't always know very much about our great-grandparents. I knew a bit about my great-grandparents. Both of my grandfathers had 11 brothers and sisters. They were one of 12 children, so their mothers were sort of talked about a bit. But one family that I dealt with informally not very long ago, we found their problem by doing a ChatGPT search of their family history, and we found that they had a great-grandmother who started having babies when she was 16, and had 9 children, 3 different fathers, perhaps 4 different fathers, but definitely 3, and then died at 42 from cancer. And she would have got cancer because her immune system was depressed, and her immune system was depressed because she had so much stress and strain in her life. Can you imagine how much sleep deprivation, how much anxiety, how much worry about where are they going to get money for the next food, because they were poor people, worried about having a roof over their head. Well, what am I getting at? This is a blind area. If you've got problems, they could be family problems. Is there anyone in the family who's got the problem, or several people in the family who've got the problem that you've got, and are you really just copying them or being loyal to them because you don't want to be happier than they were, you don't want to be more comfortable than they were? You feel that they had a hard life, they were had problems, and it's wrong for you to be happier than they were. And one of my tools is the habit of smiling. We know that when you feel good, you smile. And we know, we've known for a long time, that we got about 25 happy chemicals in our brain. About 25. There's dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, noradrenaline, and over 20 endorphins. Endorphins are endogenous morphines. Yes, we produce morphine-type chemicals which have been called endorphins. So we've got about 25 of these chemicals, and when they're high, we feel good and we smile. But what we didn't know till recently is that when we smile, our brain and glands produce even more of this happy chemistry. When you are happy and you smile, you produce even more happy chemistry, and you get happier. And it's more than that. If you feel good and you smile, and then you produce more happy chemistry, and you smile even more, and you smile at that person there, and that person, they usually smile back. And when they smile back at you, they feel better. And if instead of smiling you're frowning, well, they're likely to frown, and everybody feels worse. So that's why this family loyalty, being sort of loyal to suffering family members, is so negative. It's because if you smile, more and more of them are going to smile as well. So my 7 tools are about 90 under a minute videos, the Smile Fix It app, the smilefixit.com website, the Mental Fix It app, live streaming on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, which I do on Wednesday, Friday and Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. Perth time, which is 9 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne time, which is 7 a.m. New York time and 4 a.m. Los Angeles time. So I've switched the Sunday evening to Sunday morning at 9 a.m. to be at a more amenable time for the Northern Hemisphere, because sometimes half our viewers are in the Northern Hemisphere. So yes, so live streaming. The fifth tool is powder medicines, because when you drop powder medicine on your tongue, it gets into your bloodstream in 5 minutes. It starts to work in 5 minutes, and it's working strongly in 10 to 15 minutes. Your tongue is pink or red because the blood vessels are so near the surface, and you drop thousands of grains of powder medicine on your tongue. It gets in fast, starts to work fast, which is much more helpful if you're trying not to smoke, trying not to drink too much, trying not to have a shot of heroin, or you're trying not to have a panic attack, or you're trying not to wash your hands 15 times because you've got obsessive compulsive disorder. So the fifth tool is powder medicine. The sixth tool is pocket powder dispensers. Powder in a bottle with a little scoop was a bit awkward and a bit inaccurate, but so I made pocket dispensers. So if you've got the right medicine that you need in your pocket dispenser, in your pocket, even driving the car, you can whiz out and you do that, and in 5 minutes you'll start to get better. The seventh tool is the heartbeat meditation aid. Meditation is such a valuable tool, and everybody who's got mental health problems should meditate, but probably everybody should meditate. But the trouble is that people who would benefit most from meditation can't learn to do it, because basically meditation, you focus on your breathing, and while you're focusing on your breathing, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, you stop thinking about everything else, and you have a little rest, a little break from all your stresses, and that helps you to feel happier, more relaxed and calmer, and it alters the epigenetics of how your brain works, and you just get more and more mentally healthy if you have a meditation. But so many people can't learn to meditate because they just focus on the breathing and straight back to all their worries, because focusing on your breathing is not very strong. But I've been listening to people's hearts for 50 years with stethoscopes, and heart beats loud and strong and interesting with a stethoscope. These heartbeat meditation aids are just short stethoscopes. These heartbeat meditation aids are just short stethoscopes, and you put them in, and this is the listening part. You just put the listening part down under your clothes on your heart, and you can hear your heart beating loud and strong and interesting. And people find it much easier to learn to meditate focusing on their heartbeat rather than focusing on their breathing. In the end, it's best to focus on your breathing, but you switch from listening to your heart after a couple of months, when you've got a meditation habit, to focus on your breathing, because breathing is so much like, is so closely associated with your emotions, your feelings. Something bad happened, you gasp. Some people hyperventilate, they breathe too much. Our breathing is interrupted. If you notice your breathing just before you go to sleep, when you're in bed, you'll find it goes very even, very steady, even. And even steady breathing calms you. So that's a good way to meditate, to focus on your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe steadily, calmly, comfortably, not jerkily, and not holding your breath, and not breathing too fast, and forgetting about all your troubles, just for 5 or 10 or 20 minutes. If you want a heartbeat meditation aid, we can send you one for $25 plus postage, anywhere in the world. My eighth tool is another powder dispenser, but the medicine dispensers only give 0.2 of a mil of powder, which is not enough to give a good taste. So these bigger dispensers give about a mil, 1 mil, and we put fruit powder in them. No medicine, just fruit powder. Whatever your favourite fruit is. My favourite fruit is vanilla, so this has got vanilla in it, and I can have that in my pocket wherever I am, and I can just whiz it out and drop a mil of lovely tasting vanilla powder on my tongue and enjoy it. I can do that just for the enjoyment, and that's good. We should enjoy ourselves, and that's good. And so many of our enjoyments are harmful. Chocolate, biscuits, cakes, lollies, drinks with a lot of sugar in. Whereas fruit powder, it's got a little bit of fruit sugar, fructose, but that's not a problem, and the taste is very nice. And you can use taste to manage your habits, to make habits and to break habits. One of the greatest things in human life is putting things in your mouth. If you don't put things in your mouth every day of your life, from the day you're born till the day you die, you're going to get very tired and weak, and you may starve to death. So putting things in your mouth is just such a human habit, and we love what we put in our mouth to taste good. We love taste. So much emphasis goes in taste, and the sad thing is that one of our favourite tastes is sugar, and sugar's high in calories, and it's got no fibre, and we need fibre, and it's got no vitamins or minerals. So and it's cheap, so the food and drink manufacturers put it in everything, and that's causing an epidemic, a worldwide epidemic in the wealthier countries, of diabetes and obesity, and the diabetes and the fat block up our arteries that cause heart attacks and strokes. So yeah, that's a tragedy. But what you can do is, if you're trying to make a habit, the first thing you should do is to think about it and research it, and to talk to other people and become very sure that it's going to make your life better, or the life of people you love better. When you're very sure that making that habit will give you a better life, it's much easier to make that habit. But making habits depends on doing them over and over and over again until the electrical and chemical messages and triggers are strong. So you have to do them often. And if every time you think about the habit or you do the habit, you give yourself a lovely taste, that helps you to make that habit. That makes making that habit easier. Or if you want to break a habit, how do you break habits? You break habits by weakening and breaking the electrical and chemical messages and triggers. It's the opposite of making a habit. Making a habit, you do something over and over and over again till the messages get strong. Breaking a habit, well, some people will say go cold turkey. Just say no. I think it was Ronald Reagan's wife said, just take no. But going cold turkey is hard. You suffer. And a lot of people stop for a day or 2 days or 3 days and then relapse, or they stop for a month and then something happens, they relapse. So a much more reliable but slower way is to weaken and weaken and weaken the habits until they're very weak, and then you can just stop. how do you weaken a habit? You weaken a habit by delaying it and by doing less of it. So, say smoking cigarettes. You get the urge to have a cigarette, you delay it for 15 minutes. You just use your willpower not to smoke for 15 minutes. And when you smoke 3/4 of the cigarette and chuck the last quarter away. So you've delayed it and you've made it a little bit less, and that's weakened the electrical and chemical messages. And when you weaken the electrical and chemical messages, you can delay it a bit longer, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. And you can take a bit less, you can chuck half the cigarette away. Or whatever it is that you're trying to break. Just delay it and lessen it. And one way you can help yourself to do that is when you think about having a cigarette, instead you whiz out and you drop this lovely fruit powder on your tongue and you focus on the taste. And as the taste fades, you have another dose and you focus on it, and that helps you to delay. So, and to have less. So, this 8th tool helps to control, helps you to make habits and helps you to break habits. Of course, what have I done with it? Of course, we often put powder medicine in powder dispensers, and that's a stronger way of rewarding yourself and a stronger way of delaying things that you don't want to do. We put 2 or 3 or 4 powders together that between them relieve 2 or 3 mental health distresses which cause the addiction, and also reduce the craving. So a powder medicine in a pocket dispenser might contain something for anxiety, something for depression, and something for craving for alcohol, or craving for heroin, or craving. Yeah. Well, I think that's enough for today. What is it? Today is Friday, so I'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Perth time, 9 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne time, 7 a.m. New York time, 4 a.m. LA time, God knows what in London and Sweden and Norway, where we have quite a few viewers. But on Sunday we'll do it at 9 a.m. which is evening time in the Northern Hemisphere. I can't talk to individuals. We have so many viewers. People want to talk, and they want me to me to be guests on the. I don't know how to do it, but I'm very interested in your comments, your questions, your criticisms. So whatever platform you watch it on, send us comments. Sometimes I get 90 comments, sometimes I get 190 comments, and I answer as many as I can. I can't answer people, some people are not followers, so the message doesn't go to them. Some people have for various reasons got blocked by the platform, so I can't, but I communicate, I answer as many questions, as many comments as possible, and I benefit by the learning from the criticisms. Or you can just go to our website, smilefixit.com, smilefixit.com, and find the email address there to email me with your comments, questions, criticisms, and please do that. Okay, that's enough. Thank you. Bye.